General Mattis, President von der Leyen, Secretary General Stoltenberg, Excellencies, friends and supporters of the American Academy in Berlin. Als Vorsitzende des Board of Trustees der American Academy in Berlin freue ich mich ganz besonders, Sie heute hier im Zeughaushof des Deutschen Historischen Museum bei der Vorleihung des Henry A. Kissinger Prize an General James N. Mattis willkommen zu heißen. Dies sind keine einfachen Zeiten und bin daher wirklich dankbar, dass Sie gekommen sind, um an diesem festigen Abend teilzunehmen. I'm especially pleased that we can meet here in this remarkable setting, in the oldest building on Unter den Linden, a structure that has witnessed so much history since ground was broken in 1695, and which is now part of a museum dedicated to understanding German history. Let me officially start this evening by saying a few words about the Kissinger Prize, our awardee, and the speakers. Since 2007, the Henry A. Kissinger Prize has been awarded annually to a renowned American or European figure in the field of international affairs in recognition of his or her outstanding services to the transatlantic relationship. Past recipients included Chancellors Angela Merkel, Helmut Kohl, and Helmut Schmidt, President George H.W. Bush, Senator John McCain, and Ambassador Samantha Power, among many others. This year, the trustees of the American Academy in Berlin are proud to honor former U.S. Secretary of Defense, General James N. Mattis. General Mattis. In your confirmation hearing by the Senate Armed Services Committee, you emphasized the importance of cooperation and alliances, concluding, and I quote, "History is clear. Nations with strong allies thrive, and those without wither." This statement reflects a conviction that you have demonstrated in your military career and your civilian life. In doing so, you have made a profound and positive difference on the world stage. You have dedicated more than 40 years to defending, upholding, and strengthening democracy, the transatlantic community, and our international alliances. You have devoted your life to these institutions and ideals, which is why, among other reasons, our speakers will elucidate, the American Academy is awarding you the Henry A. Kissinger Prize. And so, let me briefly welcome President von der Leyen, Secretary General Stoltenberg, who will deliver the laudation this evening. We are truly pleased to have both of you with us, and we are grateful that you have come to speak about General Mattis. President von der Leyen, it is wonderful to see you again. After all these years, when you and I actually briefly spent time when you were the Familienministerium working on the inclusion of women in Germany in the workforce and in boardrooms. We have finally made some progress, and for that, I thank you. Throughout your career, and especially in your most recent posts, you have been a committed Atlanticist, a strong advocate for the bond between the U.S. and Germany, and for European unity throughout your public career. Especially during your tenure as Germany's Minister of Defense, you worked closely with General Mattis on some of the most challenging issues of our time. In an era when the forces of division might have triumphed, you both found the path of cooperation, supporting the bilateral relationship, and the alliance. General Secretary Stoltenberg, as a former Prime Minister of Norway, UN Special Envoy, and a NATO Secretary General, you have always been a champion of transatlantic cooperation and effective global engagement. You and General Mattis share not only an extensive working relationship, but also a set of ideals about how free nations can work together to ensure their common defense, along with the preservation of peace and prosperity. Thank you both for being here. Tonight, we are celebrating the transatlantic relationship, as this ceremony always has, and one of its greatest advocates. I think it is safe to say that we are doing so with perhaps a bit less anxiety than was the case at the last few such ceremonies, and perhaps also with a more vivid and renewed sense of the value of this relationship. The American Academy views its mission as being about advancing that bond. That is why we are establishing, as an enduring testament to this year's honoree, a James Mattis Distinguished Fellowship at the Academy, which will bring outstanding U.S. individuals from the world of politics, diplomacy, security, or international relations to Berlin each year to engage with German audiences and German leaders in a variety of fields. The Academy, as I should actually add, is an institution that is not only dedicated to the advancement of political dimensions of that bilateral relationship, but also the cultural side, with our support for outstanding scholarship in the humanities and social sciences, as well as artistic expression. For this reason, I am excited that this visitorship will honor someone who is renowned as a scholar general with a deep knowledge and appreciation of history. I am also pleased to announce that we're already almost halfway through our fundraising goals, thanks to extraordinary generous gifts and contributions from Eric Schmidt, who led the Defense Innovation Board at the Pentagon during then Secretary Mattis's tenure, as well as General Dynamics and Raytheon Technologies. And we are pleased to have Chris Lombardi and Jeff Stocky from Raytheon Technologies with us tonight. We very much hope that others will soon step forward, and perhaps this evening will goad some of you to step forward to help us finish the job of creating this visitorship. The Henry Kissinger Prize ceremony is a high point of the annual calendar at the American Academy. It would not be possible without the support of a group of organizations that have demonstrated their long-term commitment to the Academy and to its mission. Accordingly, I would also like to thank the representatives of Bloomberg Philanthropies, Cerberus Deutschland, Google Germany, Robert Bosch GmbH, and Porsche, who are with us tonight, as well as KPM, Hotel Adler Kempinski, and Konzerthaus Berlin for generously underwriting this evening. Now, many of you are probably wondering where the namesake of this prize is this evening. Unfortunately, Dr. Kissinger could not attend this year's event in person, but he asked me to inform you that this is not an easy decision because he has tended every single prior Kissinger Prize since the year that this was founded. Nevertheless, it would not be a Henry Kissinger Prize ceremony, nor would it not be typical of Henry not to be here in spirit, if not in person. So with that, he has prepared a video for all of us, which we will hear now. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Henry Kissinger.
It is my great honor to be present at the award of the Kissinger Prize to my admired friend, General Jim Mattis. Jim Mattis is a distinguished soldier and a purposeful thinker about the future of America, of free peoples, and of the global order. I met Jim when he was commander of the Central Military Command of the United States, in charge of military operations in the Middle East during the Obama administration. One day, I received a call from General Mattis, whom I had never met, with telling me that he was engaged in military operations all over a historic area comprised of many different people and cultures. And he did not think that his military preparations were adequate to encompass the range of issues that he was indirectly affecting. So he came about once a month for quite a while to discuss with me the geopolitics of the region, my perception of its history, and exchange views about its evolution in a way that would contribute to world peace. It turned out that he had sold himself short in introducing himself, because I found that he was carrying books on ancient history with him wherever he went. When he came to see me the first time, he had a volume of the reflections of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor. In the months ahead, I developed enormous admiration for this soldier who was, in its essence, attempting to improve the world order. He eventually was obliged to give up that position because at a meeting in Washington, when asked how he related military to political guidance, he answered that he would do that when he received appropriate political guidance. Jim returned to government when President Trump appointed him Secretary of Defense, a position he filled with the same sense of responsibility and dignity that he had the previous one. Jim was dedicated to the purposes of America, but he also deeply believed that America could not protect itself unless it protected others as well, and unless these other people could find themselves ready to share American purposes. It was always an inspiration to meet with Jim Mattis during a very divisive period in our national history. And to see his steadiness of purpose and his commitment to the principles that he had believed in. Finally, a point was reached wherein the opinion of Jim Mattis, a decision was taken that imperiled people who, in reliance on America's words, had risked their life and the future of their society by following American advice. When he accepted the order, he drafted a letter to the president and delivered it personally, which said that it would be better for the president to have at his side somebody as Secretary of Defense more in accordance with his views. He forewent the temptation of outlining the specific nature of his disagreements, nor has he at any other time participated in strictly political controversy. In a speech explaining why he accepted his position as Secretary of Defense to a group of Marine soldiers, he said that he had flunked retirement and therefore had to go back into service. Now he's in retirement again, but he has not flunked his role the second time either. He has written books focused on the lessons he learned from his soldiers, which consisted of service, duty, and self-sacrifice. At a complex period in American history, where national divisions sometimes seem to override great national purposes, Jim Mattis, by his demeanor, by his erudition, and by his personal conduct, remains a symbol of the role that America plays in the community of people who defend democracy and freedom. For that reason, Jim Mattis has been deeply devoted to the Atlantic Alliance. He has recognized that alliances are not simply a legal document, but an expression of a common purpose and a common capability. And he knows also that with the passage of time, conditions change, purposes have to be redefined. New capabilities have to be developed. And this is a particular issue at a moment when technology is transforming our societies, our capabilities, and our perception of reality. Jim Mattis does not present himself as a carrier of philosophical messages, but his life has been an expression of the importance of national purpose and allied cooperation. On the day of his resignation, he came to my office and personally hand-delivered a letter thanking me for our previous discussions, which he said they enabled a simple infantryman to step forward and do his duty. Jim was never a simple infantryman, and Marines are never completely simple because they go through an arduous process of training and of experiences of national service. He has honored America by his conduct, and he has put forward a commitment to allies and to world peace. In his role as Secretary of Defense, he was not only concerned with alliances, but with relationships with our presumed adversary in China, and devoted many thoughtful hours of study to that problem. So it is my great personal honor and a great privilege for the American Academy to honor Jim Mattis for his services, for his view, and for his inspiration.
Dear Mrs. Peterson, dear Jim, dear Jens, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, as a four-star general and former Secretary of Defense, James Norman Mattis knows a thing or two about leadership. In his latest book, he sums it up as the 3 C's: competence, caring, conviction. And these values don't just describe his leadership style. These values describe Jim Mattis, the man himself. Dear Jim, I vividly remember our first conversation. It was beginning of 2017. Jim Mattis had only been Secretary of Defense for a few days. President Trump had just called NATO obsolete. I was aghast, and, as many of my colleagues, deeply concerned. Then Jim Mattis came, and he found calm words of wisdom amid a storm. Jim reassured us that NATO would remain the bedrock of American foreign policy. He made it very clear that for him, NATO was the glue that held together the security of the United States and Europe. And he made it clear that he cared deeply about the views of European allies. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis became the reassuring presence for us in the Trump administration. With him at the helm of the Pentagon, we were confident that someone in the inner circle of the US administration knew the value of the transatlantic alliance. And we knew we could count on him as a reliable friend. Indeed, Mrs. Peterson, you quoted Jim Mattis, who told the Senate Armed Services Committee at his confirmation hearing, "History is clear. Nations with strong allies thrive, and those without them wither." End of quote. Of course, we all know Jim Mattis, and we knew the US very well. During one of my visits to the United States as defense minister, Jim Mattis, it was the first visit, visiting you in the Pentagon, Jim Mattis, he took the time to tell me about the German armed forces' contributions to global security. That was a typical Jim Mattis. He was listing all of our German missions on all continents. He also said that he was a newcomer and that he was ready to listen to his colleagues. Well, the effect, of course, was immediate. Everyone was ready, of course, to listen to you. Dear Jim, in the toughest of times, you kept our transatlantic partnership alive. You were a steadfast ally on whom we could always count. And you were a guardian of the internationalist tradition in American foreign policy at a time where this view was anything as popular in Washington, D.C. For this alone, your contributions to transatlantic relations are exceptional. Of course, we all know Jim Mattis, the military man. His 44-year career began in 1969, when he enlisted in the US Marine Corps Reserve, a career that brought him to the highest ranks of NATO as Supreme Allied Commander Transformation SecT, as well as head of the United States Central Command. But many of us also know Jim Mattis, the sophisticated scholar, the well-read man of letters, the analyst, or, as his Marines like to call him, the warrior monk. But today, I'd also like to focus on Jim Mattis, the man of conviction. It is because of this conviction that Jim resigned as Secretary of Defense in December 2018. His firm belief in America's leadership role in the world and the importance of trust and respect of her allies. And it was again this conviction we saw at play in the summer of 2020. As a military man, Jim Mattis was focused on getting the job done, and he has always been a man of few words in public. But in June 2020, he forcefully broke his silence. As Trump threatened to deploy US troops to confront peaceful demonstrators on American soil, General Mattis did not hold back. He spoke out unambiguously to condemn acts that he saw as divisive and contrary to American values. His powerful intervention resonated widely in America and beyond. His words reminded all of us that there is an even better America. An America that everyone in this room believes in. His brave words were an act of loyalty. Loyalty to the greater good and loyalty to the country he loves. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Mattis is a soldier whose competence is matched by very few. A scholar who cares deeply about the men and women in uniform, who cares deeply about his friends, and sometimes even cares about the enemy. And he is a man of the 3 C's: competence, caring, conviction. There are no better words to characterize this evening's laureate. Dear Jim, thank you for your outstanding service to our transatlantic community. Thank you for your commitment to what the alliance between the United States and Europe can mean to the world. And thank you for your friendship and your support. I cannot think of a more worthy laureate. Congratulations on behalf of all of us of being awarded with the Henry A. Kissinger Prize.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Sandra Peterson and Daniel Benjamin and the American Academy for hosting this very special event this evening. And as always, it is a great pleasure to share a podium with you, President von der Leyen, dear Ursula, to be here together with you in Berlin. I am really delighted to be here to celebrate a lifetime of public service. And it is my honor to pay tribute tonight to an outstanding ally, diplomat, marine, and friend. Congratulations, General Mattis, on receiving the Henry Kissinger Prize. In November 2016, I had my first conversation with the newly elected President Donald Trump. He started the call by saying that he was a big fan of NATO, a huge fan. And then he asked me about different candidates for his new administration. He asked me about Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State. That was no surprise, because his name was already mentioned in the media widely. And I knew Rex. He had come to Norway many times as the CEO of ExxonMobil. So I recommended Rex Tillerson for the State Department. Then Donald Trump asked me about Jim Mattis for Pentagon. And I was taken a bit by surprise. His name hadn't been mentioned so much in the media. And apart from a very brief encounter, at the conference, I have never met General Mattis. In fact, almost all my knowledge about him came from an HBO series. Generation Kill, about the Iraq War, that I watched together with my son. In this TV show, Jim Mattis was a mythical figure, a much feared and revered general with a call sign Chaos. Even though I liked the series, I was not convinced it gave me enough of a basis to recommend him as Secretary of Defense. So I didn't really know what to say. Then one in my team who was listening in to the phone call quickly passed me a note which read, "Jim Mattis is great." Yeah. Jim Mattis is great. He knows NATO. So I said, Jim Mattis is great. He knows NATO. And I warmly recommended him. Of course, I cannot claim that my recommendations made a difference, but at least I was right. Jim Mattis is great. And he proved to be an outstanding ally, a steadfast supporter of a strong transatlantic bond. Over the years we worked together, I saw Jim's commitment to our alliance. He reminded us on many occasions that the United States has never gone to war alone. Because, as has been quoted many times, he said at his first defense ministerial meeting in Brussels at NATO, and Ursula was there together with me, he said following, "History is compelling, nations with allies thrive, those without wither." Jim committed himself and the US completely to NATO and to European security. But he always expected the same level of commitment in return. Or as he told us, the American taxpayer cannot care more for your children's security than you do yourself. Thanks, not least, to Jim's style of plain talking, defense spending in NATO has continued to rise for 7 consecutive years. European allies and Canada have added an extra $260 billion for new capabilities. So, Jim Mattis is a steadfast ally, and he is a skilled diplomat. He always tries to find political solutions and considers military force a last resort. As he reminded US lawmakers, the more money they cut from the State Department for diplomacy, the more money they have to give to the Pentagon for bullets and battle tanks. Still, you should never doubt Jim's determination to back up his words with action. Because, as the saying goes, there is no better friend, no worse enemy than a US Marine. He might have made his reputation for creating chaos in enemy ranks. But in turbulent times, Jim was a pillar of stability for our alliance. At our NATO summit in Brussels in 2018, we had some, I will call them, challenging discussions, after which Jim showed up in my office, unannounced, not just to see me, but to walk the corridors and remind NATO staff of America's unwavering commitment to a strong transatlantic bond. So Jim is a steadfast ally and a skilled diplomat. But in his heart, he is first and foremost a Marine. In fact, in all my years at NATO, I have never met anyone with greater respect for our troops, or known someone who is more highly respected in return. I had the honor of traveling with Jim on a visit to Afghanistan in September 2017. Shortly after we left the plane, it was targeted by rockets in the worst attack on Kabul airport in years. I must admit, I was just a tiny bit concerned. But Jim, of course, was as cool as ever. On that trip, we traveled to the forward operating base Gamberi. Normally, in these hot remote locations, I would dress more informally, but not with Jim Mattis. We spent the whole day in dark suits and ties, because this was his way of showing respect for those in uniform who were sacrificing so much. In his speeches to the troops, Jim showed a deep understanding of their daily hardships. From being on dangerous patrols under a burning sun to serving so far from home. He reminded every one of them that they represented the very best of their nations, from all races, genders, backgrounds, and sexual orientation. Within his praise for their service, he carried a very important political message about diversity and respect. During our visit, we both addressed crowds of soldiers. We became quite the double act, although I felt more like the local Norwegian band warming up for Bruce Springsteen. The troops pretended to applaud for both of us, but clearly Jim was the real star. So Jim, let me congratulate you again on receiving today's award. Thank you for being a steadfast ally, a skilled diplomat, and a formidable Marine. But most of all, thank you for being my friend.
With little more to do here, obviously, we now will award the Henry Kissinger Prize to General Mattis. When I finish reading the citation, photographers will come up to stage for a few minutes to take photographs of his accepting the award. Thank you all for the understanding of these a little bit kludgy logistics. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's Henry Kissinger Prize recognizes General Mattis for his extraordinary and distinguished service to the government of the United States military, and as you have just heard, equally importantly, to our global alliance partners. Over the course of more than 4 decades, General Mattis has been recognized as one of the preeminent American military leaders of our time. He is justly celebrated during his tenure as commander of the U.S. Central Command and as the 26th U.S. Secretary of Defense, not only for his vision, his integrity, and his unwavering principles, but also for his insistence on the centrality of democratic institutions to the effective and peaceful maintenance of global governance. This made him a beacon of reason and equanimity in an extremely turbulent era. While occupying key leadership positions within the United States Armed Forces and civilian leadership, General Mattis has always been a strong supporter of alliances. No other leader in Washington has so convincingly combined civilian and military perspectives so clearly and credibly, listened to allies, and spoken truth to power on both sides of the Atlantic, and been more clear about his fundamental commitment to the historic transatlantic project. With his consistent support of NATO as a bedrock of U.S. security and the nation's political ties, and his commitment to the transatlantic community, General Mattis exemplifies the very best in American leadership, strengthening the West in lasting ways and setting an extremely high standard for all future office holders. For these achievements, the American Academy in Berlin is very proud to honor General James Mattis as the Henry H. Kissinger Prize. Congratulations. Uh-oh. It's in there somewhere. What is that? Oh, it's not in the box, James.
Well, thank you, Sandy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank all of you who made this evening events possible. I would just tell you, for me, it's an extraordinary moment. You just heard many kind things. There's no false modesty here. I would not be standing here today were it not for President von der Leyen and Secretary General Stoltenberg. That's fact, that's not fiction, and that shows what the alliance is all about. I was astonished when I was told that I had been selected to receive a prize in the name of the most famous statesman of our era, for I am famously not a statesman. For whatever else you heard, a man's got to know his limitations. Dr. Kissinger has long been a trusted advisor and friend, and through these tumultuous decades, his devotion is second to none in supporting our nation's ties and the transatlantic bonds. I can only come humbly to the American Academy, receiving such recognition in the name of a man who commands such widespread, absolute, total respect. I come here confident that Germany and America share a commitment to keeping alive these experiments that we call democracy, and that's all they are, experiments. Our form of governance is designed to be hard, and we are reminded that democracy is not ours by divine right. These noble experiments are ours thanks to the sacrifices of those who went before us, paid for by their blood, sweat, and tears. Our shared freedoms are our inheritance, but also our promise to our children's future. When the day comes that our generation turns leadership over to the next, it's my earnest hope that our democracies will be on a stronger footing than today. In this effort, Germany and America will play key roles. To believe in the values we espouse requires that we take a stand in support of those radical ideas that grew out of Europe's Renaissance. We see those themes and sometimes the very words from yesteryear surfacing in our own nation's defining documents. Today, I have the high honor of sitting here once more alongside two of the most capable and devoted leaders of our effort to turn over an improved world to our children. This effort acknowledges the essentiality of Europe combined with the long-standing transatlantic links. Only if democracies stand united in their commitment to our interconnected freedoms can our nations withstand the tests of our time. The responsibility that we carry is a worthy cause, one that we must not relinquish. Excuse me. Any illusions of autonomy on either side of the Atlantic are just that, illusions. And we do not have autonomy on either side of the Atlantic when it comes to defense. And we must not irresponsibly relearn the hard way. Thank you very much. If that was vodka, it'd be a lot better speech, I guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen. But we must not irresponsibly relearn the hard way those lessons that history already makes clear to us. President von der Leyen and Secretary General Stoltenberg, dear Ursula, dear Jens, you do me the greatest honor by being present in your very kind words tonight. Across the free world, we could not find two more astute leaders to guide our combined efforts. I remain proud of having worked at your side, forever grateful for your wise counsel through it all, where trust stands as the coin of the realm. When you walk into a room, your names are passports to our trust. You've gained your high reputations the old-fashioned way, earned in tough circumstances. As leaders, you are not permitted to say you did your best. Rather, you must do what is required, and you stand that ultimate test daily. Nothing is brain dead when you engage. Nothing lies moribund when your focused energy is brought to bear in the difficult but necessary effort to create common ground. You represent the best of us, and even today it is your words that still shape my thoughts. America sees a stronger, intertwined Europe being in America's interest, just as it's in the interest of Europe and democracies everywhere. We in the free nations must continue the quest toward unity of effort in defense of individual freedom and the rule of law. Ultimately, the European Union and NATO are unions of values. They are necessary at a time when authoritarians sense they have the wind at their backs, calculating that our sometimes raucous democracies are vulnerable to their meddling and bullying. It is your leadership, Jens and Ursula, that turns our values into concerted action. The solidarity among democracies is the best interest of all who live in freedom, not just for those of us in the transatlantic community. Also, our stand for human rights gives hope to people who do not enjoy our freedoms. So it is most assuredly my honor to be selected for this award by the American Academy in Berlin, an institution unconfused in its mission of sustaining strong connections between Germany and America in the worldwide competition of ideas. As a former NATO officer, I cannot come to the capital of Germany without the strongest sense of gratitude for Chancellor Merkel, then Minister Ursula, thank you, and the German people. Over 150,000 of your troops served honorably and ethically in Afghanistan after NATO invoked the Shared Defense Clause, coming to America's aid. Today, I pay my respects to the German families whose sons fell in battle, as well as those families whose innocent loved ones died in the senseless 9/11 attack on New York City. We grieve for your losses as we grieve our own, and regardless of any heated political rhetoric, We Americans will not forget our debt to those who came to our aid. We believe that we serve a higher purpose when banding together to protect values critical to shaping a better world for our children to inherit. Such service continues to be crucial to the security and prosperity of our countries. New challenges arise. If we are to remain secure and prosperous, we will need to confront them together. We face a Russia whose president claws for legitimacy by foreclosing cooperation with free societies. It was sad to see the shuttering of the NATO-Russia Council offices in Brussels. This is a wound inflicted on the Russian people by an unaccountable leader who sees peaceful relations with NATO and the EU as threatening his continued chokehold on power. All European democracies, even the smallest on Russia's borders, are seen as threats to Putin's control. Our democracies also face a China increasingly repressive at home and aggressive internationally. Watching the orchestrated commercial, cyber, and diplomatic attacks on Australia is instructive and revealing as it is disheartening. Employing its power to punish Australia for its democratic values like freedom of the press and punishing cultural institutions to silence scholarship, including at German universities. It's not something that we can ignore, nor we should all ask ourselves whether our countries could accept the 14 demands China has made of Australia, a fellow democracy that has tried repeatedly to craft a positive relationship with China. We must also ask whether our own economies can continue to prosper if an international order emerges where coercion of commerce becomes the norm. We cannot be who we claim to be if we turn a blind eye to such activity and more. The United States isn't seeking confrontation with China or Russia. It was with great reluctance that as Secretary of Defense, I concluded in our revised National Defense Strategy that great power competition had once again become the paramount threat to democracy. Over preceding decades, the China we hoped for would be one prosperous and rule-abiding, because it was by opening up to market principles and protected by the rule of law that China was becoming prosperous. There can be no doubt that the hard-working people of China have been the true beneficiaries of the international order that we allies together created following the tragedy of World War II. But that seems not to be the China this Chinese government wants, and we allies are just at the beginning of figuring out what that means to us. The United States is perhaps earlier to conclusions, being a Pacific nation with long-standing alliance commitments in Asia. But the industrial espionage, military recklessness, violations of other nations' sovereignty, and the human rights depredations China is committing against her own citizens can only continue to drive convergence among the democracies, which can look away for only so long. I cannot imagine the German public being indifferent as they become more aware, just as our American public slowly, even reluctantly, came to grips with violations of international norms by China as well as Russia. Dwight Eisenhower, the American president who welcomed West Germany into NATO in 1954, believed that the role for our militaries was to hold adversaries at bay while the vibrancy of democratic societies and their dynamic economies won the Cold War. No country better exemplifies that vision than a unified Germany. Who can fail to see that a once divided Germany, knit together after the fall of the Berlin Wall, is now a sparkling testament to what free people in a democracy can achieve? Your hard-earned success will not be lost to the dustbin of history so long as all democracies hold your example foremost in these challenging times. For in this competition between what sort of life to turn over to our children, were Europe to be passive, a spectator vice a participant, the world would be a poorer place, and Europe a mere appendage of Eurasia. Managing day-to-day affairs is not enough, because a world in which European traditions and values have lost influence can only be a lesser world. And humbly, I say to our German friends, you are key at this moment. A world lacking Germany's moral voice is a weaker world. The world needs to know what Germany stands for and equally what Germany will not stand for. Your voice echoes loudly when it comes to the essential issues of our time. And having studied, admired German leaders, at least several of which are here tonight, I am confident that in the ongoing competition between systems of governance, Germany's firm support can be counted on by fellow democracies under siege. Challenged daily by brazen dictators, by autocrats and charlatans, this is a stern time. But we should not doubt our values, rather we should doubt our doubts, drawing strength from our values. There are some in the West whose faith in democratic principles may have faltered, yet just look at how many wish to immigrate to our countries, and you see faith and hope writ large. And who else believes in the magnetism of free societies? Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. That's why they're constricting the freedom of their own people while attempting to undercut ours. U.S.-German cooperation will be a bellwether for Europe and the United States as we deal with today's rapidly transforming international landscape. We are coming out of a rough patch, and yes, we will have future disagreements, but our past shows how we can honestly discuss our differences, then find an overarching strategic approach that helps navigate these waters. Recalling first principles, this is not so difficult if our nations practice a spirit of collaboration. For when it comes to the defense of freedom, NATO and the EU remind us of history's truism: we are stronger together. Recall, too, that the bonds between Germany and America have never been solely about security. People-to-people bonds are more numerous than formal government relations. As the American Academy exemplifies, our friendship is also about science and industry and art and human thriving. These connections are not solely a product either of simply the post-war era. I try to imagine what the conversations between the great German scientist Alexander von Humboldt and the American President Thomas Jefferson must have been like during Humboldt's 1804 trip to the young United States. Although he was at the end of a 5-year expedition, Humboldt wrote, "I could not resist seeing the United States and enjoying the consoling aspects of a people who understand the precious gift of liberty." Humboldt and Jefferson discussed proof that the woolly mammoth had lived in the Americas, the monetary policy of Russia and the United States, and even the need for a canal to connect the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. Our Library of Congress still holds the maps drawn by Humboldt for Jefferson, explaining where the boundaries were of the Louisiana Purchase, because Humboldt had already been there before anyone in Washington had. And while admirably a critic of that birth defect of our country's slavery in our country that had not yet been eradicated, Humboldt felt such a deep connection to the spirit of America that he described himself as half an American. So, in accepting this award, ladies and gentlemen, with the greatest respect for Germany and the bonds our countries share, I hope for this day you will allow me to declare myself half a German. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Meine Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard from Dr. Kissinger, and you have heard from our honoree, General Mattis, whose superb address expresses so much of what the American Academy stands for. Jim, I want to thank you for summing up both the promise and the peril of what we as an Atlantic community face with such eloquence, incisive understanding, and characteristic historical grounding. We have known each other a long time, you and I, and you have now spoken at multiple times at institutions that I've been affiliated with, and each has been a high point succeeded only by the next. So if I may give you some unsolicited advice, if you don't start lowering your standards, you will be booked through the next millennium. You will never get back to Richland, and you will never get back to the banks of the Columbia River in your beloved Washington state. Thank you so much for making the long journey from the Pacific Northwest to join us here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I am mindful that I am all that stands between you and a good night's sleep. And I'm also urged to tell you that as soon as dessert is finished, you should probably depart because of the peculiar restrictions under which we are operating. So I will be brief. I want to thank President von der Leyen and Secretary General Stoltenberg for their excellent remarks in praise of General Mattis. The European Union and NATO are fortunate to have such outstanding leadership at this moment when we confront so many serious challenges. This room, the Zeughaushof, was built, as you heard, at the end of the 17th century, and it was built by the Elector Friedrich III, who was later the first king of Prussia. And the room was used as an armory and a place for showing off weapons, like all the impressive cannon that you see around the room. I think it is really wonderful that today, in this historic room, instead of cannon, we are admiring this remarkable assemblage of Western leadership, which has done so much for the peace and well-being of Europe and North America. I'd like to make just one personal note, and that is that this event had to be postponed repeatedly because of the pandemic, and in fact, the selection of our honoree actually predated my arrival at the Academy in the summer of last summer. General Mattis and I worked together in the US government during the Obama administration when he was in charge of the military's Central Command, and I was Ambassador at Large in charge of counterterrorism at the State Department. When I was told after I accepted the position that Jim would be the next recipient of the Henry Kissinger Prize, I could not have been more pleased, knowing his lifelong dedication to upholding and strengthening America's alliances. I was well acquainted with the Academy's excellence in bringing the best America has to offer to Berlin. Our artists, writers, humanists, public and policy intellectuals, and social scientists, and how that work aimed to knit our societies together. But beyond that, this Kissinger Prize selection told me exactly what I needed to know about the Academy, about its ideals, and about its outstanding leadership on our Board of Trustees. As someone whose career involved reporting as a journalist on the heroic diplomacy that led to German unification and the creation of the post-Cold War world, who had the privilege of working in the Clinton White House on refitting NATO for a new era, and then in the Obama administration, collaborating with counterparts here in Berlin and across the continent on countering the terrorist threat, I could not be more supportive of our alliance or more excited to be leading an institution whose mission it is to deepen the bonds, political, cultural, and human, between our nations. Though the North Atlantic partners are more than 75 years into this effort, the work has not gotten old, the job is not done, and the goals remain vital. In closing, I want to thank the team here at the Deutsches Historisches Museum and its president, Raphael Gross, who I believe is here, for helping us put this event together under difficult circumstances. I also want to thank the great staff of the American Academy in Berlin for making this magnificent undertaking possible. And finally, let me say to you, our guests, echoing Sandy's remark earlier, das ist keine einfache Zeit. The Academy greatly appreciates your willingness to come out tonight to honor General Jim Mattis and to show your support for our institution and our mission. Einen schönen guten Abend, kommen Sie gut nach Hause, bis zum nächsten Mal.